December 1944. Adolf Hitler is looking at a map in his headquarters. He places his finger on Bastogne. We will shock them. We will split the Americans in two. We will reach Antwerp. The generals are completely silent. The plan is very ambitious. But Hitler wasn't accounting for one person, one name, one general. George S. Patton. Where's Patton? Asks Field Marshal von Rundstedt. Hitler waves his hand. Dismissively. Patton? He's stuck in Lorraine, 150 kilometers to the south. It will take him weeks to reach us. By then, we'll already be in Antwerp. Rundstedt is worried. But my leader, Patton, is very fast. Hitler interrupts. Impossible. There's winter. There's snow. The roads are bad. No army can turn 90 degrees and counterattack in 48 hours. Impossible. 48 hours later, Patton's tanks will be approaching Bastogne. Hitler won't believe it. How is this possible? This can't be. But for Patton, it's possible. Because Patton was something Hitler didn't understand. Speed, aggression, foresight. German generals understood him. Hitler didn't. And this mistake would cost Germany dearly. This is the story of that mistake. Why did Hitler underestimate Patton? Before we start the story, please hit the like button. It helps us reach more people with these forgotten stories. If you're new, subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the story. First encounter, North Africa. November 1942. German intelligence officers had gathered in an office in Tunisia. On the table were photographs, reports, maps. The subject of discussion was a new American commander. His name, George S. Patton. Patton had commanded the Western Task Force during Operation Torch. 35,000 American soldiers had landed on the Moroccan coast. It was America's first major ground operation in World War II. German commanders had watched with amazement. General Albert Kesselring was a commander of German forces in the Mediterranean. When he read the report, he frowned. Who is this American general? How fast is he moving? The reports were disturbing. Patton had captured Casablanca in 3 days. He had accepted the French surrender. His units were advancing so fast that German observers were shocked. The American army was generally careful, slow, relying on overwhelming firepower. Patton didn't fight that way. The intelligence office requested more information. Who was this man? What was his background? How did he think? The incoming reports disturbed the German commanders even more. Patton had spent his career studying German military tactics. He read German military theory in the original language. He had visited French battlefields from World War I. He had walked the points where German armies had nearly succeeded. He understood German operational thinking better than most German officers. A German intelligence officer had concluded his report thus: "This American general thinks like us. Speed, maneuver, aggression. It's as if he was trained in German doctrine, not American doctrine. Dangerous." February 1943. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel attacked American lines at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. The attack shattered the American defense. Inexperienced American units fled in panic. It was America's worst defeat of the entire war. German commanders watched with interest. How would the Americans react? Would they retreat? Would they change their commanders? Would they lose their courage entirely? The answer came in early March. George Patton took command of 2 corps, which had been devastated at Kasserine. What happened next surprised German intelligence officers. Within 2 weeks, Patton transformed 2 corps. The same soldiers who had fled in panic were now attacking. Discipline was restored. Morale was rebuilt. Combat ineffective units were suddenly aggressive. German reconnaissance units reported that American patrols were probing their lines with an intensity they had never seen before. Rommel himself took note. He wrote in his diary, "American forces have suddenly become much more dangerous." The change was too rapid to be explained by reinforcements or new equipment. Something else had happened. There was someone new in command. March 1943. German intelligence offices began collecting every bit of information about Patton. How old was he? Where had he been trained? Which wars had he participated in? What were his weaknesses? The file was thickening. Patton was 57 years old. He had fought as a tank commander in World War I. During the interwar period, he had written armored warfare doctrine manuals. He was ruthless about discipline. He demanded perfection. He accepted no excuses. A German officer wrote in his report, "Patton sees war like we do. Speed and shock are weapons. Defense is defeat. Attack is everything. This man thinks like a panzer commander, not like an American infantry general." This was exactly what frightened the Germans. Sicily, Patton's true face. July 1943. The Allies invaded Sicily. The plan called for Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's British Eighth Army to take the lead. It would advance from the east coast toward Messina. Patton's Seventh Army would protect its flank. Patton had other ideas. He drove his forces across the western half of Sicily so fast that he surprised everyone, including his own commanders. His units covered more distance than any Allied force had achieved in the entire war. German forces trying to evacuate across the Strait of Messina found themselves in a race they hadn't expected. Patton was advancing so hard that their escape routes were threatened. Units that expected days of withdrawal time found themselves with only hours. The evacuation turned to chaos. German commanders desperately struggled to get their men out before Patton cut them off. Patton reached Messina before Montgomery. Despite starting from farther away, he had covered 200 miles in 39 days. Fighting all the way, German post-operation reports described the campaign with a mixture of professional admiration and genuine alarm. A German officer wrote, "Patton fights like a panzer commander, not like an American infantry general. He takes risks that American doctrine doesn't allow. He exploits weaknesses before defenders can react. He thinks like a German." This was exactly what frightened them. August 1943. At the height of his success, Patton visited 2 evacuation hospitals in Sicily. What happened there nearly destroyed his career and gave the Germans an unexpected gift. Patton encountered soldiers suffering from battle fatigue. In his view, cowards abandoning their comrades. He slapped one soldier in the face. A week later, he slapped another, this time drawing his pistol and threatening to shoot the man. News of the incident reached Eisenhower. He was furious. The story leaked to the press. Suddenly, the general who had won a brilliant campaign faced calls for his removal. Congressmen demanded he be sent home in disgrace. Newspapers published editorials describing him as unfit for command. German intelligence followed the controversy with great interest. They had identified Patton as the most dangerous American commander. Now the Americans might remove him themselves. German officers couldn't believe their luck. But Eisenhower didn't fire Patton. He severely reprimanded him and kept him on duty. The Germans noted this decision with concern. The Americans clearly valued Patton, despite the scandal. This meant they were probably saving him for something important. By early 1944, Patton was out of combat command. He was waiting in England. The Germans obsessively tracked his movements. They knew he was there. They knew he wasn't commanding any of the forces that would obviously participate in the coming invasion. So what was he doing? German intelligence concluded that Patton was commanding the main invasion force. It made sense. The Americans wouldn't waste their best general on a secondary operation. Whatever Patton was directing would be the real attack. What the Germans didn't know was that the 1st United States Army Group was a phantom. It existed on paper and in radio signals. It had tanks made of inflatable rubber. Headquarters buildings were painted plywood. The massive invasion force existed entirely in the German imagination. It was the greatest deception operation of the war. And it only worked because the Germans believed that wherever Patton was, the main attack would come from there. German high command was convinced that the 1st United States Army Group would land at Pas-de-Calais, the shortest crossing point of the English Channel. They deployed their best reserves there. They built their strongest defenses there. They waited there for Patton. June 6, 1944. Allied forces landed in Normandy, 150 miles southwest of Pas-de-Calais. The invasion Hitler had been waiting years for had finally come. But German commanders hesitated. Was this the real invasion, or a diversion designed to draw reserves south before Patton struck with the main force at Calais? Field Marshal Rundstedt wanted to immediately release Panzer reserves and drive the Allies back into the sea. But the order never came. Hitler and his staff believed the Normandy landing might be a deception. The real attack led by Patton could come at Calais any day. For 6 critical weeks, German armored divisions sat near Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an attack that would never come. Divisions that could have crushed the Normandy beachhead in its first vulnerable days remained frozen because of one man. Because the Germans couldn't believe the Americans would leave George Patton out of the war's most important battle. August 1st, 1944, Patton finally received combat command. He took control of the Third Army and ended the battle in Normandy. The Germans had been waiting for him. Now he was here, and he was about to prove that every fear they had about him was justified. In the first 2 weeks of August, Third Army covered more distance than any Allied force had achieved in 2 months of fighting. Patton's division swept through Brittany, then turned east toward Paris. German units that had held defensive lines for weeks suddenly found Americans behind them, cutting their supply lines, threatening their headquarters. The German command structure in western France collapsed. Units lost contact with their headquarters. Orders contradicted each other. Commanders didn't know where the front was because Patton kept moving it. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge had replaced Rundstedt as senior German commander in the West. He sent desperate reports to Berlin. The American Third Army was everywhere. When German forces tried to establish a defensive line, Patton was already beyond it. The situation was out of control. In mid-August, Patton saw an opportunity to end the battle in France with a single stroke. German armies were withdrawing through a narrow gap near the town of Falaise. If Allied forces could close this gap, they would trap hundreds of thousands of German soldiers. Patton pushed north toward Falaise. Canadian and Polish forces pushed south. The pocket tightened. German units inside began to panic. Soldiers abandoned their vehicles and tried to escape on foot. Officers lost control of their men. The destruction was catastrophic. German losses in the Falaise pocket exceeded 50,000 prisoners and perhaps 10,000 dead. Equipment losses were even more devastating. The German army in France lost most of its tanks, artillery, and transportation. German officers who survived the pocket later described it as worse than Stalingrad. At least at Stalingrad, there was time to prepare, they said. Patton gave them no time at all. After the war, Allied intelligence officers extensively interrogated captured German generals. They asked about Allied commanders. Which ones did they respect? Which ones did they fear? The answers were remarkably consistent. Montgomery was predictable. The Germans said he was methodical and careful. You always knew what he would do. That made fighting him easier. Bradley was competent but cautious. He didn't take risks. German commanders could anticipate his moves and prepare defenses accordingly. But Patton was different. German generals used words like unpredictable, aggressive, and dangerous. Field Marshal Rundstedt said Patton was the Allied general they feared most. General Fritz Bayerlein, who commanded the Panzerlehr Division, said Patton was the only Allied commander who had the instincts of a German panzer leader. The Germans respected Rommel because he was bold and unconventional. They found the same qualities in Patton. He didn't fight by the book. He made decisions faster than his opponents could react. He understood that war was about speed, shock, and violence, not careful planning and overwhelming force. Rundstedt put it simply, Patton was the most dangerous man they faced. December 1944. Germany launched the war's last major offensive, a massive attack through the Ardennes forest that completely surprised Allied commanders. Within days, American forces were retreating. The 101st Airborne Division was besieged at Bastogne. The situation was desperate. Eisenhower held an emergency meeting at Verdun. He asked his commanders how quickly they could counterattack. Most generals talked about weeks of preparation. Moving armies was complicated. They needed time. Patton said 48 hours. I can attack with 3 divisions in 2 days. The other generals thought he was showing off. It was impossible. You couldn't turn an army 90 degrees and attack on a completely different axis in 48 hours. Just the logistics alone would take weeks. But Patton had already prepared. His intelligence officer Oscar Koch had predicted the German attack. When everyone else was ignoring the possibility, Patton had quietly developed contingency plans. When the attack came, he was ready. Patton made one phone call. Within hours, Third Army began turning north. More than 250,000 men, tens of thousands of vehicles, in winter conditions, on icy roads, in 48 hours. The Germans couldn't believe it. They had expected weeks before any serious counterattack. Instead, Patton was already hitting their southern flank. The relief of Bastogne came on December 26. The offensive that was supposed to split the Allied armies was stopped. After the war, German generals were asked about the Battle of the Bulge. What went wrong? Many gave the same answer. They didn't expect Patton to react so quickly. They thought they had more time. They never learned. From the first day they faced him in North Africa to the last day of the war, the Germans underestimated how fast Patton could move, and every time they paid the price. So, why did German generals fear Patton more than all other Allied commanders? Because he thought like them. German military doctrine emphasized speed, aggression, and exploitation of enemy weaknesses. The blitzkrieg that conquered Poland, France, and nearly Russia was built on these principles. German commanders understood this type of warfare instinctively. Patton understood it too. He had studied German tactics for decades. He had internalized their war philosophy. When he commanded an army, he fought the way German generals wanted to fight. But there was something else. German commanders could predict what most Allied generals would do. They knew American and British military systems. They understood the doctrine, caution, reliance on overwhelming firepower before advancing. Patton didn't follow the rules. He attacked when doctrine said defend. He advanced when logistics said stop. He took risks that his superiors thought reckless and his enemies found terrifying. The Germans never knew what Patton would do next. They only knew it would be fast, it would be violent, and it would cost them. But Hitler didn't understand. German generals understood Patton because they were professional soldiers. They dealt with tactical realities on the ground. They saw how dangerous Patton was because they fought against him. Hitler didn't understand Patton because Hitler had delusions about his own military genius. He had conquered France. He had taken Poland. He saw himself as a master of military strategy. But Hitler was disconnected from tactical realities. He conducted war from headquarters at the Wolf's Lair. He read maps. He listened to reports. But he didn't understand what it meant to face an enemy like Patton. Hitler's mistake about Patton stemmed from several factors. First, ego. Hitler believed in his own military decisions. He thought his generals knew less than he did. When generals like Rundstedt and Kluge said Patton was dangerous, Hitler didn't listen. He thought they were exaggerating. Second, racial prejudice. Hitler believed Germans were superior. Americans were soft, undisciplined, individualistic. How could an American general equal a German general? This prejudice blinded Hitler. Even when he was surprised again and again because of Patton, he still didn't understand. The Normandy deception worked because Hitler believed Patton was important. But he believed they would start the main invasion without Patton because he thought the Americans would make such a mistake. Third, strategic detachment. Hitler thought about grand strategy, oil fields, trade routes, political objectives. He didn't dwell on the importance of individual generals at the front. But wars are won by generals. And a general like Patton can change the course of war. Hitler didn't understand this. He thought generals were interchangeable. German generals knew differently. They had fought against Patton. They had seen his speed. They had experienced his aggression. They had watched their armies torn apart by his units. Rundstedt said after the war, Patton was a supreme master of mobile warfare. He was the brilliant practitioner of offensive tactics. He was the Allied general the Germans feared most. From the deserts of North Africa to the forests of the Ardennes, George Patton earned that fear, one battle at a time, one impossible victory at a time. German generals conquered Europe and learned what it felt like to face a commander who fought exactly like them, but better. May 1945. The war in Europe ended. Germany surrendered. German generals were interrogated in prisoner camps, and almost all of them talked about Patton. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt had commanded German forces in Western Europe on D-Day. He told interrogators, "Patton was your best general, the fastest, the bravest, the most dangerous. We couldn't stop him. We could only slow him down. And most of the time we couldn't even do that." General Gunther Blumentritt was Rundstedt's chief of staff. He said, "We could never understand Patton's speed. We thought he was in one place. Then he was 100 kilometers away. He was fighting on one front. Then suddenly he turned to another front. He moved his army faster than we moved one of our corps." General Fritz Bayerlein, commander of Panzer Division, was more direct. "Patton was one of us. He was like a German panzer general. He understood war with our understanding. This made him very dangerous, because we knew what he would do, but we couldn't stop him." Not a single German general spoke about Montgomery or Bradley this way. They said Montgomery was predictable. Bradley was competent but cautious. But Patton was different. What the Germans described was something Hitler never understood. Patton wasn't dangerous because he was American. He was dangerous because he was genuinely good. He fought with qualities rarely found in his allies: speed, aggression, boldness, willingness to take risks. And perhaps most importantly, he combined this with a will to win. Patton didn't just want to fight. He wanted to win overwhelmingly, decisively. He saw every battle as an opportunity to completely destroy the enemy. German generals understood this because they thought the same way. But many Allied generals didn't. Most were more careful, more cautious. Not Patton. How much did Hitler's underestimation of Patton cost Germany? No one will ever know the exact number, but you can count some moments. The Normandy deception froze German panzer divisions at Pas-de-Calais for 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, the Allies established a beachhead in Normandy. If those panzers had been released immediately, the landing might have failed. The Falaise pocket lost more than 50,000 German soldiers and countless equipment, a direct result of Patton's rapid maneuvering. These losses made it impossible for Germany to establish an effective defense in the West. The Ardennes offensive exhausted Germany's last strategic reserve. Hitler ordered the offensive because he believed the Allies couldn't respond so quickly. Patton responded in 48 hours. The offensive failed. Those reserves were spent. In each case, Hitler's mistaken decision stemmed from underestimating Patton. In Normandy, Hitler waited for an invasion where Patton would never come. At Falaise, Hitler refused to withdraw units before Patton escaped. In the Ardennes, Hitler assumed Patton couldn't react so quickly. Every time Hitler was wrong, and every time the German army paid the price. After the war, surviving German generals spoke openly about Hitler's mistake. Rundstedt said, "The leader never understood Patton. He looked at him as an American general. Standard, predictable. But Patton wasn't standard. He was unique. And the Fuhrer was blind to seeing this." Blumentritt added, "We told the leader several times how dangerous Patton was. He didn't listen. He said the Americans were soft, undisciplined. Even when Patton proved he was anything but soft, the leader still didn't believe." Bayerlein was even sharper. The leader's ego destroyed Germany. He didn't listen to his generals. He saw threats like Patton and ignored them. He believed too much in his own genius. And this arrogance cost us the war. George Patton died in a car accident in December 1945. He had left the war behind by only a few months. But his legacy continued. German generals wrote about Patton for the rest of their lives. Almost all of them described him as the most dangerous Allied commander they faced. Almost all of them said Hitler didn't understand him. In post-war interviews, a pattern emerged. The German professional military class understood and respected Patton. He knew how to win wars. They fought like him. But Hitler didn't understand. And Hitler controlled Germany's military strategy. So one of Germany's greatest threats was underestimated by its leader. This story isn't just about Patton. It's about ego, about prejudice, about leaders who believe too much in their own wisdom and refuse to listen to their experts. When Hitler's generals told him Patton was dangerous, he didn't listen. He believed his own judgment was superior. And this arrogance cost Germany tens of thousands of lives, countless battles, and possibly the outcome of the war. Patton wasn't perfect. He had mistakes. He had a temper. His personality alienated many people, but he knew how to fight, and his enemies knew it, except the enemy leader. Field Marshal von Rundstedt summarized it in one of the last interviews of his life. If the leader had understood Patton as we understood him, he would have made different decisions. But he didn't, and this was one of Germany's greatest strategic mistakes. The lesson of history is simple: don't underestimate your enemy, especially when your own men tell you how dangerous he is. When ego replaces wisdom, disaster follows. George Patton was the man Hitler underestimated, and that mistake cost Germany dearly. If the story affected you, please hit the like button. Every like helps us reach more people with forgotten stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Leave a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. America, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. This community is spread all over the world, and every viewer here plays a role in ensuring history is not forgotten. Thank you for watching.